time of uncertainty. My name is Brittany Sudd, and I'm one of the JNF Toronto Future board members. JNF Future is the young professionals group of JNF, the Jewish National Fund, catering to the under 40 age group. We plan a variety of events throughout the year, with all of the proceeds going to a project in Israel. Although we all may have moved indoors, there are so many ways to keep our minds stimulated and entertained, which is why JNF Future decided to offer webinars such as this evening's to our community. For tonight's webinar, please keep your microphones muted. Should you have any questions during the presentation, please write it in the chat and it will be answered either in between the slides or at the end of the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker of the evening, Dr. Alex Chris. Dr. Alex Chris grew up in Toronto, completed her undergraduate degree in psychology at Western University, and her master's and PhD in industrial organizational psychology at the University of Guelph. She currently works as the mental health program lead at Rogers, where she is developing and implementing the mental health strategy for over 26,000 employees across the country. Alex is also an active volunteer in the Jewish community. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our speaker this evening, Dr. Alex Chris.
Thank you so much, Brittany, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex, and today I'm going to be talking about developing resilience in a time of uncertainty. Although I'll be speaking about resilience in the context of COVID, everything that we go over today will be applicable to all areas of your life and to all times. I hope that you can use this time to pause and reflect. There will be opportunity for self-reflection, so have a notepad and a pen handy or your smartphone so you can record some notes and intentions. Also, feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. Ruchama Shanehouse will be moderating the chat and she will let me know if any questions come up. And of course, there will be a formal Q&A at the end. So before I dive into the content, I want to take a few moments to check in with how everyone is feeling. What we're living through now is something we haven't experienced before, and for many people, it's been a roller coaster of emotions. Sometimes we feel grateful for having more time to spend with our families, and other times we're feeling the fear of the uncertainty that exists. The question, how are you, is something we all ask each other multiple times a day. When people ask us the question, we don't necessarily give an authentic response. And when we ask others the question, we aren't necessarily paying close attention to the answer or expecting an authentic response. So I'd like you to actually take a couple seconds, and if you can open up your browser and go to www.menti.com. Ruchi has shared the link in the chat, and share your feelings anonymously. When you go to the website, you can use the code 646174, and it will give you the option to enter 3 feelings. So you can share positive feelings, negative feelings, and it's going to pop up in a word cloud, which I will share. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Ruchi, can you see the screen that's being shared, the word cloud? Okay, good. So I'm just gonna wait. I'm not sure actually how many people are on this call, but we can see here there's 21 responses. So I'll just wait maybe 30 more seconds to see what comes up for people. Okay, so some of the biggest words that we're seeing are tired, anxious, grateful, and stressed. We're seeing some other smaller words like unknowing, unmotivated, calm, confused, worried. Thank you everyone for sharing your feelings. We're seeing so many different feelings here, and I want to emphasize that all of these feelings are really normal. So if you are feeling tired, maybe you have kids at home that you need to attend to while you're working. Or if you're anxious, maybe you lost your job and you're feeling high levels of financial strain and anxiety. Or if you're like me, you might be completely swamped with work because you've had to pivot and adjust your strategy to this new reality. And finally, some people might be feeling grateful, which we're seeing here. I saw calm somewhere. Maybe this time has enabled you to reconnect with people or focus on things that you love that you didn't have time for in the past. I wanted to start with this check-in as a reminder to check in with yourself regularly. We often ignore our emotions or we suppress them. Paying attention to our emotions is important because they're usually trying to tell us something. If we acknowledge how we're feeling, we can better cope with difficult emotions, and we can also respond more appropriately to others. Last week was Mental Health Week in Canada, and the theme was Get Real. We need to get real with our emotions. We need to acknowledge them and let them run their course. This is a huge part of building our resilience. So before I define my resilience, I'd love to give all of you the opportunity to share what resilience means to you or how you define resilience. So if you can share some of your responses in the chat, that would be great. Thanks, Mom. My mom is saying to bounce back. Just getting through. Thanks, Lori. Resilience to me means being able to cope with all that life throws at you and come away from it knowing that you've learned to be better and to live better. Getting through to the other side of tough situations, falling down and getting up, flexibility. So these are all spot on. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from difficult life events or experiences so we can continue moving forward. And we certainly saw someone share that in the chat. This tends to be the most common definition that most of us are familiar with. But it's also more than that bounce back. It's also about having the ability to adapt and be flexible in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, or high levels of stress. We've all had to adapt our behaviors in order to manage and cope with this very different reality, which goes to show that we all have some level of resilience. And finally, resilience is about learning from challenging situations and applying these learnings to other difficult situations that you might encounter, whether that be today, tomorrow, or even in a few years from now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about an example of resilience that's really personal and important to me. For those of you who saw this webinar posted on my Instagram account or found out about it another way, maybe through LinkedIn, I'm delivering this webinar as part of my involvement with the Jewish National Fund, which is dedicated to building social infrastructure to benefit vulnerable populations in Israel. And that's why I'm going to speak a little bit about the resilience of the Jewish people. The Jewish people have been persecuted for thousands of years, and not only have we survived, we've always managed to bounce back and come out even stronger. Back when I was in high school, I went on the March of the Living, which is a trip to Poland where we actually go and see the concentration camps and the death camps, where 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. I remember walking into the building with the crematorium and seeing the ovens where Jews, including my family members, were murdered. Every year on the March of the Living, Holocaust survivors accompany the group and share their stories. After spending days in the concentration camps being reminded of death, we would get together in the evening, we would dance, and we would sing Hebrew songs, and we would say L'chaim, which means to life. And I remember thinking, these survivors went through the worst trauma and tragedy that anyone could ever experience. They're not only returning to the place where their families perished, but they're actually celebrating. How could they possibly be celebrating? They were celebrating, and they still celebrate, the life that they rebuilt, the families they created, and the next generation of Jewish people who would carry on their legacy and ensure that the Holocaust is never forgotten. To me, that is truly the greatest demonstration of resilience. The resilience of Holocaust survivors enables them to not only get through the most horrific of times, but to actually come out with newfound meaning and purpose. So where does resilience come from? There is certainly a component of resilience that is innate or intrinsic. It's actually quite incredible how people can adapt in the midst of tragedy or trauma. Research shows that approximately 65% of people who experience a traumatic event in their lives are able to return to their normal level of functioning shortly after the event and stay there. Another part of our resilience is influenced by our life experiences. Often the people who have experienced trauma and tragedy are the ones who are most resilient, because they're able to look back on their past experiences and know that if they could get through that, they can get through other challenging times. But what's interesting is that resilience isn't only intrinsic, and it's not only based on our life experiences. Resilience is actually something that we can develop proactively by engaging in positive habits and behaviors. But why does resilience even matter to us, and why has it become such a hot topic during COVID? Resilience is so important because it's what protects us from stress. And regardless of what we're experiencing in COVID, some people might be happy and relaxed and calm. We all experience stress, and many people find it really hard to manage that stress. In fact, some people even become immobilized by stress. Stress can lead to physical symptoms like nausea, stomach pains, fatigue, insomnia, and to significant mental health challenges. And the reason that this happens is because when we're in a heightened state of stress, our brains can actually start to shut down the restorative and reparative functions in our body. And after a while, we start to develop physical symptoms and more severe psychological symptoms. So resilience is what helps us cope with stress and the demands that are constantly being thrown at us. I like to think of resilience using a bucket analogy. The bucket represents your level of resilience. On some days, your bucket is going to feel fuller. On those days, it will feel easier to cope with stressors, and you're less likely to be set back by challenges. And that's because you've likely been engaging in healthy habits to replenish your resources and fill up that bucket. You can see the resources listed on the slide over here. We have different kinds of resources, and we can engage in different kinds of strategies to replenish those resources. For example, physical resources refer to physical energy. When we eat well, get enough sleep, and exercise, we replenish our physical resources. Cognitive resources refer to our ability to problem solve and think critically. At the end of a tough day, when our cognitive resources are depleted, we have a much harder time thinking critically. So on days where your bucket feels full, the demands that you're facing match the resources that you have available. So even on days where you experience a lot of stress and there are many demands coming your way, you feel equipped to cope with them because you have those resources. But on other days, your bucket may be emptier. On those days, there's a mismatch between the demands you're facing and the resources that you have to support you. So if you haven't slept enough or eaten properly, you're likely going to have a harder time coping. We can engage in many different positive practices to replenish our resources, which in turn fill up our resilience bucket. But before I start talking about those strategies, I actually just want to give you a moment to reflect on your coping strategies. The positive ones that will fill up your bucket, so they replenish your resources and fill up your bucket, and maybe even the negative ones that are draining your bucket. So I've listed positive and negative coping strategies on this slide. I'm going to give you a few moments to reflect on the strategies that you use, and just to record them if you have a piece of paper or if you have your phone out, write down the strategies that you find yourself using. I'm just seeing a question in the chat. From Gabriel. Out of curiosity, in this graphic, what do the holes represent? So the holes represent the water coming out of the bucket. So the more water in the bucket, that would mean we have more resources and we're feeling more resilient, better able to cope with the demands that are coming towards us. But as we experience stress, as we experience demands, maybe we're engaging in negative coping strategies, our resources or the water is essentially going to be drained from the bucket. So we constantly need to fill the bucket because it's also constantly being drained. No problem. Okay, so hopefully everyone has now had a few moments to reflect on some of the strategies that you use. Out of curiosity, and you can respond with a yes or no in the chat, did this exercise help any of you recognize or maybe even reinforce some of the negative coping strategies that you use? I promise we'll get to the positive ones, but I am going to just start with some of these negative coping strategies. I'm seeing 2 yeses. If anyone wants to elaborate in the chat, feel free. Wine. Thanks, Lily. Sleep too much. We often forget that they're more harmful than hurtful. Skipping meals, staying up too late. Yeah, so I wanted to ask this question because I want to encourage you to think about how you can replace some of these negative strategies with positive coping strategies. I'm going to share positive coping strategies throughout the remainder of this presentation, but I wanted to just give you a chance to maybe recognize some of the negative strategies that you're using because we don't necessarily think about it. But when we engage in some of these strategies, if we yell, that can actually drain our emotional resources. It can be exhausting when we yell at someone. It can also drain our social resources because it can impact our relationships. So as I go through the presentation and speak about some positive coping strategies, think about how you could perhaps replace some of the negative ones with the positive ones. But before I start to go through those strategies, I really would love to hear from you. What are some of the positive coping strategies that you're using to build your resilience? And please share in the chat. Being creative, yoga and exercise, meditation. Oh, wow, lots of meditation. Reading Talmud, music, reading a book, going for walks, staying in touch with friends remotely. Yep, Morgan, that's my friend from New York. Seeing my niece, that's definitely one of my favorite self-care strategies. Wow, I'm seeing a lot of meditation. That's really, really amazing. I'm actually seeing a lot of variety here. I've done this before, and I find that I often see a lot of physical exercise or activities that bring us joy. And those are so important. We all need to be engaging in some kind of exercise, some kind of activity. It's so important to do things that bring us joy and that make us happy because it gives us that time to replenish our resources. But in addition to some of these strategies that I think we talk about pretty often, I'm going to be talking about some other strategies that we can use. So cognitive strategies and emotional strategies that we can actually use to cope with negative thoughts and emotions. And as I talk about some of these strategies strategies are going to be things that you're already doing, but some will probably be new to you. So as I go through it, again, I encourage you to think about which strategies really resonate with you. And then once you've reflected on the strategies that resonate with you, I would encourage you to just go even one step further by thinking about 3 small actions you can commit to doing this long weekend to build your resilience. So perhaps you can commit to doing something kind for yourself this long weekend, and I would encourage you to write it down so that way you're more likely to do it. Make a commitment to connect with someone you care about, or maybe someone you haven't connected with recently. And finally, and perhaps most challenging, make a commitment to use a new strategy you learned today to accept your feelings, whether they be positive or negative. So let's get started on talking about some of the strategies that we can use. And I'm going to start with the physical category. We can replenish our resources, so our physical, our emotional, our cognitive resources by engaging in physical activity. There's a strong link between our physical health and our mental health, and we call this the mind-body connection. If my body is not in a great state, then I'm probably not going to feel great emotionally. So if you've ever heard the term hangry, it means hungry and it means angry. When we're hungry, we usually don't feel so great mentally. So attending to our physical body is really important for building our resilience and our mental well-being. Whether that's sleeping regular hours, eating nutritious meals, or moving your body, all of these things are going to contribute to our resilience and our mental health. And moving your body can be different for everyone. It might mean doing a few stretches throughout the day. Maybe it's a high intensity cardio class, or maybe it's going for a walk. You just need to get your body moving. And I just want to mention, it's so nice to see all these people who I know sharing in the chat, and I can only actually see a few people on the side of my screen. And my grandparents just popped up on the side of the screen. My grandfather's 94 and my grandmother just turned 90, and we call them every day to make sure that they went out for their walk because we know how important it is for their well-being. So I'm so happy to see them here on this call. Does anyone have any questions about the boosting our well-being by engaging in physical strategies? Okay, I think that category is pretty straightforward. So now let's move on to the emotional category and how we can replenish our emotional resources. There's a myth that people who are resilient are almost always positive and upbeat. I have an Instagram account that I created about 1.5 years ago. It's called PhD Positivity. And I use this account to share tips and tools to promote mental health and well-being. And when I started my account, I remember I was having a bad day or maybe even a bad week. And I was talking to one of my friends and she said, "No one would think that you get down Miss Positivity." And my response was, I didn't name this account because I think I miss positivity. Like everyone else, I experience negative emotions and negative thoughts. I called the account PhD Positivity because my goal is to share all the different kinds of positive practices that we can engage in to boost our well-being and to build our resilience. And the strategies I talk about, they're not only evidence-based, so they have research behind them to back them up, but they're also strategies that I try to practice on a regular basis because they're really important for my own personal well-being. So just like everyone else, I do experience negative emotions and negative thoughts, but also like everyone else, I don't want to get stuck with these negative emotions for too long. Because if we do get stuck with them for too long, it can lead to more serious mental health conditions like anxiety or depression. So when I experience negative emotions, I actually allow myself to sit with them and accept them. And I know this idea of accepting emotions can be quite difficult to understand, so I'm going to ask a question to help clarify what this means. Have you ever been upset with yourself for feeling a certain way? Have you ever been angry and then gotten upset with yourself for feeling angry? When we feel upset about an emotion we're feeling, we're actually judging the emotion, which can then make it a lot harder to cope. So instead of trying to push away those emotions, or instead of being upset about how you're feeling, there's actually some really great strategies to help you feel what you're feeling. So I usually do a short meditation or take a few deep breaths or go on a mindful walk. These practices allow me to accept the negative emotions without judgment, sit with those emotions, and eventually let them go. They actually disappear a lot more easily and a lot more quickly if we accept them than if we try to fight them off. So people with higher levels of resilience are not immune to negative emotions. They're just less likely to dwell and stay with those negative emotions. So I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into some of these practices. Meditation is the practice of simply noticing your thoughts, emotions, and reactions without judgment. It's about being in the here and in the now. People who are depressed ruminate about the past, and people who are anxious tend to worry a lot about the future. So it's really important to focus on the here and now, and that can actually help us to reduce our stress response. So when I get very stressed, I'll often take a few deep breaths, or I'll do a 3-minute meditation, because that helps me get back to a more neutral state so that I feel better and I feel like I can get a fresh start just a few minutes later. So I've included some apps up here on this slide if you do want to practice meditating. So Headspace, Breathe and Calm are really great apps. Now, I know that meditation scares people, and many of you might be jumping to the conclusion that meditating is just not for you, although I was very impressed. I saw a lot of people write meditation in the chat. So I do want to say that I was there at one point, and I still don't find meditating, I don't find it easy at all. It really feels like I can't turn off my thoughts, but what I've learned is that that's actually really normal. We're human beings, our thoughts wander. And the purpose of meditating is actually just to notice your thoughts and to notice when they wander. And then when you notice them wandering, you bring your attention back to your breath. So meditating has helped me to be more mindful in my everyday life, especially when it comes to eating or just noticing the positive things that are happening around me. But if I still have not convinced you to give meditation a shot, I will say that there are other opportunities to practice mindfulness. So meditation allows us to, it builds the capacity to be mindful, but you can still go for mindful walks, mindful hikes, you can listen to music mindfully. Even some sports can be practiced mindfully, like skiing or snowboarding. I've gotten asked before if watching TV or watching movies is a form of mindfulness because these activities are calming. And my answer is that although these activities can be calming and they can help you to zone out, the goal of mindfulness is actually to zone in and to tune into your experience. So if anyone has any questions about mindfulness or meditation, feel free to just write it in the chat. The next practice I'm going to talk about is gratitude. Now, when we focus on the negative, it actually feeds into the stress cycle. But gratitude forces us to focus on what's working well in our lives. By doing this every day, we not only boost positive emotions in the moment, but we're training our brain to become more skilled at noticing and focusing on the positive. So I'm actually going to give you a few moments right now to write down 3 things that you're grateful for. It can be something minor, like your morning cup of coffee or tea, the dinner that you just ate, or something more significant like your health and the health of your family members. And after you've taken some time to reflect, I would love it if you could share it in the chat. And I see that one person says, gratitude is how I get by. And if you want to expand on your experience of gratitude, then also please feel free to include that in the chat. Healthy family, thanks, Karen. My happy niece, health, ocean view, job, health of family, good friends, strong community, the cherry blossoms, nice. I'm grateful I met you. Oh my God. I work with Edward at Rogers. That is so nice, Edward. I'm very grateful I met you too. My family, my friends, my health, everything I've been given in this world. Health is number one, always, and my friends and family. So I don't know about you, but just reading these things, like, just gives me all those positive feelings. It really makes me feel quite good. And when I practice gratitude, as I said, it doesn't just make you feel good in the moment, but it actually trains your brain to see the positive that's happening around us. And it gets us to reflect on some of the positive things that might have otherwise passed us by. So if you did enjoy this exercise, this is something that you can do daily in a journal. There are tons of journals, actually. If you go to Indigo or on Amazon, they actually sell gratitude journals. And you can also just do it on the fly when you simply want to recenter. I think it's really wonderful to be able to notice the small things that add joy and happiness to our days and to our life. And my brother just wrote, Georgia's watching and she is a very proud niece. Well, nothing makes me happier than that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next category, which is the cognitive category. And the cognitive category reflects our thought processes and how we interpret events. This category is perhaps the most complicated, and I've simplified the information here. So if this is something you want to delve more deeply into, feel free to reach out to me and I can suggest other resources. I'm going to be suggesting some resources in just a few moments. So our thought patterns, the way we think and the way we talk to ourselves, impacts how we feel about ourselves and how we cope with challenges. It impacts our resilience. So again, I'm going to give you a moment to reflect on your thought patterns. think about a time where perhaps you made a mistake or didn't do something as well as you might have liked, and try to think about something more recent. We've all been undergoing we've been living in such a different time, and we're doing things so differently. So if you didn't do something as well as you would have liked, that's probably pretty normal right now. So think about a time where, you maybe made a mistake. How did you speak to yourself? Did you call yourself names? Did you beat yourself up? Are you someone that jumps to negative conclusions about yourself, that you're just not good at this? So if so, this is a form of negative self-talk, and it's a kind of negative thinking trap. It's when we overgeneralize and judge our worth based on a single action. We do this to motivate ourselves to do better next time, but it doesn't actually work, because when we talk to ourselves negatively, it usually makes us feel pretty badly, and that makes it a lot more difficult to cope. What works better is to be self-compassionate, and I'm going to get into that in just a few moments. But before I get there, I also want to talk about this other thinking trap, catastrophizing or affective forecasting. Affective forecasting is when we overestimate how long a bad period will last. Researchers have found that this is something really common that human beings do. So how have you been thinking about this COVID situation? Are you feeling like this is going to last forever? And again, please feel free to share in the chat with a yes or no, and if you'd like, you can also elaborate. Thanks, Patricia. So for a long time, yes, but I'm okay with that. Not forever, but for a lengthy amount of time. I think the uncertainty is the hardest part. 100%. The uncertainty is causing people a lot of anxiety right now. Uncertain for sure. A long time, I think I can manage. Okay, that's really good, and that's positive. Oh, golf courses are opening. That's great. My uncle will be very excited about that. So I think a lot of people are really struggling with the uncertainty, and a lot of people are feeling like this is going to last forever. And when challenging events happen, we allow our brains to go to the worst case scenario, and sometimes we do it as a way to protect ourselves, because if the worst case scenario doesn't happen, then at least it wasn't as bad as we thought. So there's actually an evolutionary reason for these kinds of negative thoughts, and I find this to be particularly fascinating. Human beings were actually wired to focus on the negative. Looking for negatives was a survival mechanism. Our ancestors, who were able to identify threats in the environment, literally like the tigers and the bears, either engaged in that fight or flight response. And they were more likely to survive than our ancestors who didn't notice a threat, because if they didn't notice the threat, they stayed in one spot and they likely were eaten alive. So because of that, our brains have actually evolved to focus on the negative, and we call this the negativity bias. So we can't change the fact that highly stressful events happen, but we can change how we interpret them and respond to them. But the thing is, in order to be able to do that, we have to recognize when we have those negative thoughts and when they come up. And that can be really hard to do because our thoughts are so automatic. So there are actually a lot of great apps out there that can help you to become more mindful of your thoughts. You are asked to record every time you experience a maladaptive thought, and that helps you to become more mindful of those negative thoughts. So I've included some examples here. There's Mindshift CBT, which is a great one. There's CBT Diary. There's tons of other apps. So once you've actually recognized the negative thought, the next step is to challenge the thought. And one of my favorite questions to ask is, would you speak to a friend the same way you speak to yourself? The answer is almost always no. We're a lot harder on ourselves than we are on others. So when you hear yourself speaking negatively to yourself, say to yourself, would I speak that way to a friend? And then replace that thought with something that you would actually say to a friend. So that's the third piece, replacing the thought with something more realistic or more positive. So when negative thoughts come up for me, I'm actually now able to go through this process a lot more naturally. I've definitely become more mindful of my negative thoughts. And when I'm able to replace those thoughts with something more realistic, it has an immediate impact on my mood, which then allows me to move forward. So if this is something you do want to work on, as I said, I've included some apps, but I also want to highlight something so incredible right now. Because of the pandemic, the Ontario government, and this is only relevant to people in Ontario and I think Manitoba, so apologies to those of you who are outside of Ontario and Manitoba, or if you're in the US. The Ontario government is offering free access to these two programs called Beacon and Ability CBT. They're both very similar. We promote them at Rogers Communication. You interact with a therapist on your phone, on your digital device, and you get to chat with a therapist back and forth, and they send you exercises that are based on cognitive behavioral therapy. So these programs can be really helpful if you are looking to practice reframing negative thoughts. Okay. And again, oh, thank you. Ruthie has shared the links in the chat. I'm just going back to one of the questions. I never thought of it. How would you conceptually define mindfulness? Is it all about thinking in the here and now? Mindfulness is about being present in the here and now. So being able to pay attention to what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and what's around you without judging it. So if you are feeling upset, if you're feeling sad, as I said earlier, sometimes we can be hard on ourselves for feeling a certain way, but it's just sitting with that emotion, with that feeling, and accepting it as it is. There's also some great mindful eating exercises. So if you haven't had your dinner yet, or if you're gonna have dessert tonight, try eating your dessert really mindfully. So smell it, pay attention to the taste in your mouth, pay attention to the texture. That's what mindfulness is. It's really paying attention to that experience in the moment. Okay. I also want to touch on the relationship between confidence and resilience. So the way that we think about ourselves ultimately reflects how confident we are, and our confidence impacts our resilience. So in general, we are more resilient when we have positive thoughts and beliefs about ourselves, and that's what confidence is. So if you feel that you want to work on your confidence, then I would encourage you to think about a challenging situation that you successfully overcame that at one point maybe you thought was really, really difficult to overcome. So you can think about what strengths you leveraged, what resources you drew on, what you learned about yourself, and how you can use this information moving forward. And I'd also encourage you to discuss this with a friend or a colleague, because they'll often recognize strengths in you that you didn't necessarily see in yourself. And as I mentioned earlier, the third piece of resilience is learning from challenging situations. And this is exactly that. It's learning from challenging situations and applying it in the future. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to the fourth category, which is the relational category. Maintaining positive relationships and having a good support system are, of course, very important for resilience. When we connect with others, not on a superficial level, but on a deeper level, we immediately feel happier in the moment. I don't know about you, but when I express gratitude or share positive moments or successes with friends or colleagues, I always feel pretty good after. And we actually know from research, I know from my own consulting and coaching work, that when employees are asked to describe their peak experiences at work, their best moments at work, they typically refer to those experiences involving others, such as great conversations with mentors or leaders, opportunities to coach and develop others, and social events or chats by the water cooler. But that water cooler doesn't exist right now. We don't have those opportunities to run into people in the kitchen or at the coffee machine. So we actually need to build those social connections into our calendars. On my team, we have 2 weekly lunch breaks where we check in with one another. One of my colleagues is on this call, Jordan. And some other teams are doing something called quarantini at the end of the week. And I think this is a really cute idea. Quarantini, they have martinis in quarantine. So fostering those social connections right now is super important, especially because of the isolation that many people are feeling. Something else I want to add is that when we have a strong social support network, it's much easier to reach out to others. There's a misconception that the most resilient people can go at it alone or that they don't need anyone's help, when in fact, research shows us that the opposite is true. People who are resilient reach out when they're going through difficult times. So don't be afraid to reach out to friends, to colleagues, or to mental health professionals if that is something you need. And I'm now going to move on to the last category, which is the spiritual category. And this doesn't have anything to do with religion. It's all about meaning and purpose. When we feel that we have a sense of meaning or purpose in our lives, and when we feel like we can connect to something greater than ourselves, we have an easier time coping with challenging situations and bouncing back from challenging periods in our lives. So we often think that having nice meals or going shopping or ordering things online is going to make us happy. And yes, they do make us happy and they increase our experience of positive emotions, particularly in the moment and maybe for a little while after. But that's not ultimately what leads to longer term happiness or to resilience. It's actually the experience of meaning and purpose that makes us stronger and more resilient. So I know for me that the past few weeks at work were pretty stressful. It was mental health week. We had a lot going on. But for me to get through it, I remind myself that what I'm doing is meaningful. It's having a really large impact on many employees in the organization. And that's what helps me to get through those challenging times. So I could spend hours talking about this. When I learned about this part of resilience, when I learned about meaning and purpose, it really helped me to craft my life moving forward. And this was a few years ago when I was doing my PhD, which was a particularly challenging time. So we don't have much time now to get into detail, but I will leave you with some questions to think about if you ever feel like you're unsure of what brings you meaning or what your purpose is. And if that is the case for you, I will emphasize that this is a really common experience. So I'll leave you with this question, and you can take a screenshot or a photo. Think about the last time you felt engaged and energized. Maybe you faced a challenge, supported someone in need, or impacted a life or many lives. Write down exactly what you were doing and get really detailed about it. What about this experience was energizing? What skills and strengths were you using? What were you feeling? And how can you incorporate more of these moments into your everyday life? And again, consider discussing this with a friend, a family member, or a colleague, because they will probably notice some strengths in you that you might not notice in yourself. So to conclude, I have 3 key takeaways. Resilience isn't something we have or don't have. We all have the capacity to build it over time. Cultivating resilience takes time and practice, and you need to be intentional about it. And we're all on our own well-being journey. Implement practices in your life that are going to be realistic for you, and remember to take one day at a time. Thank you. And now I can take some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. I'm just going to make a quick note. There was one more link that I didn't copy before, so it's going to be put in the chat as well. All of the links that Dr. Chris has shared will be sent to everyone after in an email.
Thank you, Ruchi.
Okay, so do we have any other questions for Alex?
No problem. It's my pleasure. If anyone if anyone has any questions, if you're looking for resources and support, feel free to reach out to me. Ruchi, I think, is going to be sending a follow-up email. She can include my email, and feel free to get in touch. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you, Vicki. Any great resources for kids? I'm less familiar with resources for kids, Lily, but if you send me a message, I'll definitely look into that, and I can ask some of my colleagues and I'll share back. Sure, I would be happy to share the PowerPoint, and there will be a recording. Thanks, Risa. And thank you all for attending. What's the best way to snap yourself out of a negative thinking trap? So I think the key word there is snap yourself out. So instead of feeling like you need to get out of it right in that moment, and I recognize that sometimes it's not the time to be feeling negative emotions. Like sometimes you have to put on a happy face because you have to get through the next hour if you have something very stressful. but I would say try to give yourself just the 30 seconds to sit. I will literally take 3 deep breaths in. There were moments in the past few weeks where I had to do that. I had to, get on a call and I didn't have time to release those emotions. So just take 3 deep breaths in and out, and it will allow you to kind of reset so that you can get through the next 30 minutes, hour, whatever it is. And then you can come back to those emotions and kind of sit with them a little bit later. What do I need to get present? Oh, to get present. Well, as I said, I think meditation is a really good way to start practicing that idea of being present and being mindful. And I'm not suggesting you spend 45 minutes on day 1, but it is a really good place to start. If you start with 1, 2, 3 minutes a day, that will just start to train you to be more mindful in your everyday life. Ooh, any advice for frontline workers helping COVID positive patients? I think that's a tough one. I think number 1 is to focus. This is a little bit broad, but just give yourself that time. Give yourself time to just pause and to breathe and to do what you need to do to stay, to be okay and to feel okay. So give yourself that time to breathe and give yourself time for you. I think that's very stressful, very anxiety provoking for your physical health, and that can have effects on your psychological well-being. I do want to say, Vivian, if you want to reach out to me after, there's also some amazing free resources, and you can access free therapy for frontline workers. So please reach out to me and I can share those resources with you. Picking up a new habit during quarantine that falls into one of these categories. My recommendation is always to start with gratitude. It's simple and it's hard to believe the impact that it can have on your life. And it really does. We know from research that it does retrain your brain. We see changes in the brain when people practice gratitude for 21 days. So even just writing 3 things down every day, they can be short and simple. You can elaborate on them as well, but that's always my top recommendation. What got me interested in this topic? I would say my own just personal experiences, wanting to know how to be more positive, wanting to know how to promote my well-being. I think the PhD, which was almost 5 years, was a really challenging time. It's very isolating, very similar to what we're experiencing now, but you're in it alone. You don't necessarily have a ton of people there to support you. And I became really interested in understanding the research behind it. Leslie Vertez, I'm so happy to see you here. This is my cousin's grandfather, and I spoke about the Holocaust because he was a Holocaust survivor. Thanks, Amanda.
Okay, great. So I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Overwhelmed with school obligations. I can totally relate to that. I think it's also just about taking one day at a time to the best of your ability. And again, giving yourself that moment to breathe, maybe organizing the tasks that you have and prioritizing what's most important, creating to-do lists. That was always something that was really helpful for me. But again, Gabriel, if you want to reach out to me, please feel free to do so, and I'd be happy to chat with you in more detail. Oh, I didn't even see Leslie wrote, when you help others, you help yourself. Yes, and that goes back to that idea of meaning and purpose I was speaking about earlier. Thanks, Mom. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending. So nice to see so many familiar names and faces. And feel free to reach out if you have any other questions.
Okay, great. So on behalf of JNF, thank you so much, Dr. Alexandra Chris, for presenting to us this evening. For everyone who's asking, the webinar is going to be posted on the JNF YouTube page either tomorrow or next week, and we'll be sending out an email with all of the links from today, with Dr. Chris's permission, the presentation, and a link to the YouTube page so you can keep your eyes posted for the video. So everyone stay healthy, stay safe, and again, as well in the email, we'll include how you can contact Dr. Chris.